In the previous video, we looked at Apple's smallest computer, the 12-inch iBook G3, which was released in mid-2001. So continuing on with the theme of tiny computers, here's the smallest Mac Apple ever released. This is the G4 Mac Mini, which was announced by Steve Jobs at MacWorld in San Francisco on the 10th of January 2005. You're probably already familiar with the design of the Mac Mini. On the front is a slot-loading optical drive and a power LED, nothing else. The Intel models have an IR sensor next to the optical drive, which is a quick way to tell if you have an Intel or PowerPC Mac Mini in front of you. Around the back is a decent number of ports considering its size. There's a 3.5mm headphone jack, single FireWire 400 port, 2 USB ports, a DVI connection which does analog and digital video, a 56K modem, 10100 Ethernet, a security slot, a power button and power in. Unlike the newer Mac Minis, the power supply is external and it's a beefy affair. When Steve was talking about the Mac Mini, he suggested it could be hooked up to their 20-inch cinema display, which I thought was a great idea, so here we are. On the side of the display are 3 buttons, 2 to control the brightness and a power button, but the monitor will automatically turn on when you power up the Mac that is connected to it. Brightness can also be set in display in System Preferences. Although the screen doesn't show up on camera as being very bright, this is due to my studio lights. It does in fact have a brightness of 250 candela per square metre. On the rear are 2 USB ports as well as 2 FireWire ports. These connect to your Mac via an Octopus cable that is hardwired in. It took almost 18 minutes to copy over 850 megabytes of videos via USB on the iBook G3 in the previous episode. So let's see how long it takes over USB 2. Okay, so I cheated and speeded up the video a little. Did you think I was going to make you sit there for almost a minute and watch a progress bar on screen? No, I know your time is precious. But I think it's safe to say that the transfer speeds of USB 2 are vastly superior over the original USB 1.1. What is also superior is the Mac Mini's ability to play back the movies I encoded for the iBook G3 episode. Before, the 500 MHz G3 was too underpowered to play the Bourne trailer and choked. The window resize animation here isn't buttery smooth like in the original Tiger keynote, likely due to the Mac being used for the demo having a way better graphics card than the one that's in this machine. But all in all, the video plays back and it's completely watchable. I don't have any speakers connected at the moment and there are none hidden away inside the display, so the sound is coming from the single speaker buried inside the Mac Mini's case. It's okay as far as speakers go, but for higher fidelity, external speakers or headphones are a must. If we open up Activity Monitor and turn on the CPU usage display, you can see that the processor is quite busy, but not pegged at 100%, meaning that fan noise would be kept to a minimum. This would be useful if you were using the Mac Mini in a home theatre environment. So let's see what a 15-year-old Mac can still do today and open iTunes. Well, as long as you have a music library locally or on a shared iTunes library somewhere on your local network, then iTunes will play back these files without issue. You can even use this version of iTunes to sync old iPods and iPhones if you had any lying around and decided you wanted a retro fix. At the time of filming this video, you can still connect to the iTunes store, albeit slowly. However, what you can't do if you have two-factor authentication is log in and download any previous purchases. If you're trying to log in with your iTunes account on a machine that you haven't used before, you will be prompted on another Apple device with a PIN. But the older version of iTunes, there simply isn't anywhere to enter it, thus leaving you without the ability to log in. So you can explore your local content and browse using Coverflow if you are one of the 4 people in the world that actually use this feature, but sadly you couldn't do much else. Let's see if it's still possible to browse the internet using Safari. Well, Google.com opens and the search works and the results seem to render okay, but here's where we have another problem. This version of Safari doesn't support encryption methods used by modern websites. There is a more modern browser called 10.4fox. According to Wikipedia, 10.4fox is a web browser for Power Macintosh computers based on Mozilla's Gecko layout engine. It is a port of Mozilla Firefox for PowerPC-based Macintosh computers running macOS 10 to retain compatibility with older architectures and older versions of operating systems, and to add PowerPC-specific optimizations for improved performance. The project was started after Mozilla announced it would not release Firefox 4 for PowerPC versions of macOS 10. Like Firefox, it includes compatibility with a wide range of add-ons, ACID 2 and ACID 3 compliance, HTML5 and CSS3 features. It also includes JavaScript just-in-time compilation, custom builds for specific PowerPC processor families, and AltiVec acceleration of media codecs. So you can get to some websites, however if the page you're wanting to visit uses a modern SSL certificate, it's likely that it won't work. But once a working web page has loaded, performance is okay. Not stellar, but acceptable. But remember, this machine is 15 years old. Let's try playing a video on YouTube. Well, that's disappointing. YouTube is telling me that my browser will soon no longer be supported. Well, thanks for the warning. I'll just click the Remind Me Later button. Great, we're in, and it looks like YouTube. Not all the elements have loaded, but it's a Unix system and I know this. Wait, sorry, wrong video. Okay, let's search for G4 Mac Mini and see what comes up. Looking good so far. But we were so close. None of the links to the videos actually work, so we're scuppered once again. Let's try something a little less demanding. Let's go out to the local network and connect to another Mac Mini which has some content on I might want to look at. I can see it under network, I can connect to it, and I can see the file share, but why is it empty? The Mac Mini I'm trying to connect to is running the latest version of macOS 10, and although I've enabled Apple File Share Protocol and SMB in sharing, for some reason all I get is this empty window. So let's give up on that and try my time capsule. This already is looking a lot more promising. It's asking for credentials, as there are no open shares. The users are configured in Airport Utility. My MacBook Pro and my Mac Mini automatically back up over the network to it. I use my time capsule as an archive drive and don't have a lot of content on it. Once authenticated, I can see my user folder. Inside here is another folder, so this is working as expected. These are some TV show episodes I downloaded but never got round to watching. They are only 720p, so let's see if VLC Media Player will play them. The latest version of VLC to support the PowerPC architecture is 2.0.10. Version 2 was released back in February 2012, a good number of years after this Mac Mini was released, and surprisingly 5 years after when Apple had finished transitioning over to Intel processors. Although we had good results playing back the transcoded videos earlier, the playback of these files isn't going so smoothly. And by the looks of it, it's only 1 or 2 frames every 10 seconds or so. So I think we can call this a fail and try some standard definition content. Looking at the inspector, the video is supposed to be 25 frames a second, but the current playback rate is between 12 and 13, so about half the expected frame rate. I'm going to call this a fail as well. We'll add streaming video over a local network to the growing list of things you can't do anymore. So what about image editing? Surely it'll be able to handle that. Launching Photoshop is the fastest I think I've ever seen Photoshop open on a machine without an SSD. I've only copied over a few images that I use for wallpaper, but let's try adjusting the brightness and contrast. This happens in real time, so it's nice to see not all hope is lost. Adobe Photoshop was often used in keynote presentations from Apple to show how much faster the PowerPC processors were compared to Intel, with Apple machines always trouncing a comparable speed CPU. This brought about the use of the phrase the megahertz myth, which refers to the misconception of only using clock rate to compare the performance of different microprocessors. On the next image, we'll try a Gaussian blur. Again, these filters apply in real time, so we can call this test a pass. So what about office productivity? Opening Microsoft Office applications has always been slow in macOS 10, and this version isn't any different. The last version of Office to run on PowerPC is 2008, and this version is the first to introduce support for the DocX, XLSX, and PPTX file formats. Microsoft started using the DocX files in Microsoft Word beginning with version 2007 for Windows, while earlier versions of Word used the doc file extension. DocX files are smaller and easier to support than doc because the format is XML based and all the content is stored in separate files and usually compacted into a single zip compressed file. So let's pretend that we need to create a newsletter. What's nice about this 20-inch cinema display is having so much screen real estate that you can have 2 pages open side by side. If you type in equals RAND open bracket 5,5 close bracket, Word will insert 5 paragraphs with 5 sentences per paragraph. The numbers can be changed according to your requirements, but it's useful to be able to fill out a document with some dummy text to get a feel on how it will look. We'll insert an image and format it so the text wraps around it, and of course all newsletters need a fancy header, so we'll insert some word art. Of course, doing a document like this isn't very taxing and works relatively well, so we'll call it a pass. Well, enough with the boring productivity stuff. It's time for, you've guessed it, will it Doom? Of course it will, but by now you should be more than aware that Doom runs on anything, even a digital camera that LGR did a video on. This version of Doom will run either full screen or window mode. I've already tried running it at full screen and it runs well, but I'm not used to running it in widescreen mode, so preferred to set it to a resolution to a more conventional 4:3 aspect ratio. What I didn't expect, however, is the fact that the textures from the original Doom iWAD seem to have been upgraded somehow. They are much more clear and seem higher resolution than the old DOS days, and it's almost like playing a completely new game, so I'm not entirely sure what witchcraft is at work here. The Mac Mini has no trouble rendering the game in this higher texture mode and barely breaks a sweat. I did poke around in the settings to see if I could overlay a frames per second counter, but couldn't find one, but it is well over 50. The internal fan does start to ramp up with extended gameplay, but this is to be expected. So in summary, was the Mac Mini any good? In its day, I'd have to say yes. The price was attractive, it used industry standard ports, and while not the most comprehensive, it was enough to get started with. A number of manufacturers released USB hubs or external hard drives with matching form factors. The RAM was user upgradable, as was the hard drive if you had the patience to take the thing to pieces. Incidentally, having to open the case with a putty knife is a stupid idea. You squeeze it between the plastic base and the metal housing and it makes a god-awful cracking noise like you're breaking some fragile component inside. Also mentioning the form factor, people came up with new use case scenarios. We use several of them as digital signboards in a few of our libraries. I kept mine for a number of years, even after the transition to Intel processors, and eventually used this as a multimedia computer hooked up to our TV in the living room. Is it worth buying today? I'd have to say no. While they don't go for much on eBay, you're better saving your money and buying an Intel Mac Mini. The latest version of macOS 10 to support the Mac Mini is 10.5.8, which was released on the 5th of August 2009, which is over 11 years ago at the time of recording this video. RAM upgrades are cheap, but the hard drive is a 2.5-inch IDE drive and they are becoming increasingly more rare and expensive as time moves on. You could of course consider installing a Linux operating system. I've never tried to install Linux as we don't get on. Or you could try another operating system like MorphOS, which is an Amiga-like operating system that I've also never tried. The Mac Mini can't boot into Classic mode natively and 10.5 drops support for the Classic environment, so unless you can think of a good use case scenario, I'd look at something else. In the next video we'll be taking a quick look at some FireWire devices. Thank you so much for watching, I hope to see you in the next one.